We have been discussing a lot about authorization server and resource server, saying that authorization server will issues the access tokens and refresh tokens to the client, and client every time they want to access a protected resource, they will share the access token issued by the authorization server to the resource server. But on a high level, we also understand like every time resource server receives an access token from the client, it has to validate that with the authorization server, because these are two different servers or two different applications handling different responsibilities. Definitely, resource server is not aware of the access tokens issued by the authorization server to all the clients. So there should be ways for the resource server to validate that access token with the authorization server. For the same, we have three different ways that most of the organizations follow, and you can also follow any one of them based upon your requirements. The very first and basic way of validating the access token by a resource server with the authentication server is by making a API call in the backend. Like whenever a resource server receives an access token from the client, it can simply call an REST API call to the authorization server by sending, I received this access token from this client ID. Do you approve it or not? When auth server says, okay, this is the correct access token which is issued by me only, and it expiration time also is not met, then in such scenarios resource server will go ahead and issues the protected resources that client is requesting. So this is the basic first way. And the second way is by having a common database. Like whenever an authorization server issuing an access token, it can write into a database, and the same database can be pointed by the resource server also. So in such scenarios, resource server don't have to rely on the network to interact with the auth server. It can directly check in the database whether the access token received from the client is really issued by the auth server or not, and what time it issued, whether it is expired or not. All such details can be validated by using a common database between auth server and resource server as shown in this figure. Finally, the last approach is the resource server can validate the signature of the token. If you can recall from our JWT tokens, the signature of the tokens can be validated by having some secret keys maintained by the both parties to make sure that no one is tampered. So following the same approach, Auth server can generate a token, access token, by using some encryption algorithm with a secret key. So whenever someone sends the same access token to the resource server, in this scenario, resource server don't have to make a call to the authorization server, or it doesn't have to look into the database also. It can simply check the signature or hash value of the token generated with the secret key that it maintains to understand if the token is valid or not. As you can see, every approach has its own pros and cons. If you see the last approach, which is validating the token signature, in this scenario, you will never depend on the network to call the auth server or database. But if you have a clear and real time checking with the auth server, you can always rely on the first approach, which is through the REST API calls. But if you don't want to overburden your auth server network, in such scenarios, you can maintain a common database which can be leveraged by both auth server and resource server. So with this, now we also have a clear understanding what are different ways that resource servers validate the access token with the authorization server. Now we have clear understanding on all the parameters that we have inside OAuth2 framework. Let's try to wrap up this section by discussing the summary of it in the next video. Thank you and see you in the next lecture. Bye.